We're honored to have with us Reverend Vanessa Southern of the Senior Minister of the Unitarian Universalists of San Francisco, who will give us a welcoming statement. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for coming and doing this welcoming statement.
My pleasure, and my gratitude, I think all of our gratitude to those of you who pulled this together, a phenomenal group of lay leaders and leaders across communities to raise awareness, knowing that knowledge is the first step for some of us, and unity is the second step to using collective power to change places that we find inequity and evil in the world. And so I'm super grateful, and so grateful to all of our guests, an incredible panel. Glad we're recording this so that it can live on beyond the confines of this time together. Two things came to mind when I was reading about and thinking about listening to the incredible interview on Pacifica Radio that happened this week. One is being reminded years ago of going to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, DC, and areas that they had enclosed by walls with videos on the inside and photographs. And those walls being symbolic in the intentional construction of that museum of two things. One, that they didn't want small children to see what was inside, displayed inside in the museum. But secondarily, to make the point that sometimes we have to look over obstacles, literal walls, prison walls, the boundaries between nations that are kept up like walls, the walls of PR and misinformation, in order to see, intentionally look to see what none of us wants to see in the world. And I feel like part of what we do as people of faith, whatever faith tradition we are in, that lives its love of one another and its commitment to, justice and compassion and courage, is to look over those walls. And it feels to me like we're gathering today to continue to do that work together. So that was the first thing that occurred to me, is the way we stand, looking at things that are difficult, incredibly broken and painful in Iran, but that speak to values that we all are committed to. The second is our own symbol of Unitarian Universalism, which is a relatively new symbol. It's a chalice that has a candle or a light in the middle. That is relatively new as a symbol of the tradition, but came out of World War II, when Unitarians in Europe were trying to rescue people from Nazism and needed something to put on the official paperwork to make it look official, to rescue the people that we were able to rescue at that time and bring as refugees and give asylum to in the US. And the light in it is both the light, often representative of the light of the human dignity that we believe is in everybody and deserves protection and care, and also the light that we shine on the dark places when we step into them together to do the work of change. And so, in the spirit of all of that, gratitude again for everybody who's made this possible and everybody who's here today, and the work that we're called to and doing together, and the beauty of the unity of that work, the power of that. I just want to, if you'll indulge me, light a chalice, which is symbol of Unitarian Universalism. So thank you all, and I look forward to today's program.
A brutal campaign of arrests, torture, and executions is now taking place in Iran. This is an emergency. The lives and dignity of hundreds of political prisoners are in imminent mortal danger. All those who stand for justice and yearn for a better world must rally to the cause of freeing Iran's political prisoners now. Beginning in October 2020, the Islamic Republic of Iran launched a massive new wave of arbitrary arrests against labor, women's, and human rights activists, dissident intellectuals and artists, protesters and revolutionaries, and members of religious and oppressed minorities. Many are now being tortured, held in solitary confinement, and denied legal rights, assistance, or medical aid, as the IRI attempts to force confessions, conduct sham trials, and carry out brutal floggings. Amnesty International warns of an alarming rise in executions, with 49 prisoners executed between December and February. This regime has a blood-stained record of attempting to violently crush any form of dissent and resistance, including sudden mass executions of political prisoners as happened in 1988. We cannot allow this to happen again. We just heard why this campaign is an emergency, and why we call on people to act now to build a global movement needed for the release of Iran's political prisoners. This is not a symbolic stand, but a concrete goal. Yesterday, PEN America issued a press release that said, and I quote, imprisoned Iranian poet, filmmaker, and recipient of the 2021 PEN Barbary Freedom to Write Award, Bakhtash Eptin, died in the Tehran hospital, succumbing to COVID-19. Our worst fears materialized as we mourn the utterly preventable death of Bakhtash Eptin. COVID is a natural killer, but Eptin's death was aided and abetted by the Iranian government every step of the way. Tehran's Evin prison was a perpetual super spreader, making his unjust imprisonment since September of last year an effective death sentence. Eptin was denied medical treatment, his comorbidities were ignored, and at times he was shackled to his bed. He was a true champion of free expression and a steadfast leader of Iranian literary and human rights communities. When his brave role put a target on his back, he did not flinch or hide. We will remember Eptin as a gifted poet and filmmaker, but also a courageous thinker and an honorable advocate, end quote. Our campaign's emergency appeal is appropriately titled, The Lives of Iran's Political Prisoners Hang in the Balance. We must act now. It was printed as an ad in the summer edition of the New York Review of Books, and it provides needed political and moral clarity in this life and death struggle. The appeal has been signed by over 3,100 people, including Noam Chomsky, Gloria Steinem, Shireen Ebadi, Dan Ellsberg, Ariel Dorfman, Judith Butler, Jody Williams, and Raymond Latta. Our appeal sets a correct moral and political terms for freeing the prisoner with its powerful content and demands, its wide embrace of justice-seeking people, and the breadth and prominence of its many signers from over 40 countries and every continent save Antarctica. It critically and uniquely calls on the people in the US and globally to stand against the Iranian regime's brutal repression while also opposing US threats or aggression in Iran. It has crossed borders and forged a community of people from all walks of life fighting for Iran's political prisoners. A powerful expression was the demonstration at the Iranian embassy on January 16th in Bogota, Colombia. You can learn more about this at the global movement page of freeiran'spoliticalprisonersnow.org. And let's spread this international spirit. Our emergency appeal says the governments of the US and Iran act from their national interests. Our campaign, on the other hand, proceeds from the interest of humanity. We, the people of the US and Iran, along with the people of the world, have our shared interests as part of getting to a better world and to unite to defend the political prisoners of Iran. We also hold that the people in the US have a special responsibility given its history, the US's history, okay, of intervention in Iran. That is to unite very broadly against this vile repression by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and to actively oppose any war moves by the US government that would bring even more unbearable suffering to the people of Iran. You will hear more about this from the speakers and solidarity statements today, not just the horrific repression, but also the fierce resistance inside Iran. It is critical to understand why we say these political prisoners represent heroism for our times. What is happening in Iran is not only theocratic fanaticism by the IRI for 43 years, horrible as that is. The IRI has been hit with repeated massive and heroic uprisings by the Iranian people in 2017, in 2019, and again throughout 2021. The political prisoners represent the hope for a different future. We call on everyone to stand with them because they are frontline fighters in Iran who are standing up, and many of them looking for a different way for the world to be. Our emergency appeal points to another way forward and demanding of the Iranian regime, free all political prisoners now, and also to the US government, no threats or war moves against Iran, lift US sanctions. I want to share Ariel Dorfman's powerful words that he sent to our campaign that expresses his deep humanity, compassion, and sense of kinship with the Iranian people and political prisoners. Quote, "If I have signed on to the emergency campaign to free Iran's political prisoners, it is because I know that this initiative will effectively call attention to the situation of men and women in the country who, if enough pressure is brought to bear on its leaders, could tomorrow be liberated from terrible conditions and extraordinary injustice. And even if those leaders do not listen, I am convinced from personal experience that the prisoners themselves are given strength to survive and persevere. They are listening. They know others far away care what happens to them, and we should not let them down," end quote.
Hi to everybody, and thank you to UUSF and IEC to having this program and for inviting me to talk about my mother's case and the struggle of the political prisoners in Iran. My name is Mariam Claren, and my 67-year-old mother, Nahi Tagavi, is a political prisoner in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Nahid is a left-minded women's rights activist, therefore she is imprisoned. She was arrested in Tehran, in the capital city of Iran, on October 16, 2020, by the intelligence wing of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Revolutionary Guard Corps are something like the deep state in Iran. They control most of the politics, economy, military, and intelligence services. They took her and brought her to the notorious Evin prison. This is the most famous prison in Iran, and it's a dark place known for mass executions and torture. There she spent 194 days in solitary confinement and was interrogated 80 times for a total of 1,000 hours, all the time without legal counsel. Cameras monitored her 24/7, even if when she uses the bathroom. She was blindfolded every time when she left her tiny cell and was forced to sleep on a hard floor, without a bed, without pillows. 6 months after her detention, in April 2021, she was brought to court. There she met her lawyer for the first time in the courtroom. The lawyer had only been allowed to go through the court papers 4 days earlier. A defense was impossible. In August 2021, she was sentenced to 10 years and 8 months in prison on the charges running an illegal group to disrupt national security and 8 months for propaganda against the state. Nahid was sentenced in a group case. Along her, there was Mehran Raouf, a workers' rights activist, Bahar Soleimani, a women's rights activist, Somaya Kargar, a women's rights activist. All of these people were sentenced to many years in prison. The Islamic Republic of Iran is criminalizing their freedom of belief, freedom of speech, freedom of thought. That's why they tried them on trumped-up charges. That's why the trial was a sham, conducted behind closed doors with no real opportunity to present a defense. Iran's judicial system is nothing more than the medieval Inquisition were. Systematic human rights violations are commonplace. The charge propaganda against the state is the most frequent charge in political motivated imprisonments in the Islamic Republic. Translated, it means thinking is forbidden and talking about your thoughts is a crime. So the case of my mother, Lohit Hagavi, is not an exception, but her case was the reason why I was forced to become a political activist to free Iran's political prisoners. Because resistance and speaking out against injustice is the only way to stand against this cruelty. The experience had taught me the more people care, someday the right people will care. People who sign our petitions, people who complain, people who protest. The prisons of the Islamic Republic of Iran are full of people like my mother, such as lawyers, poets, filmmakers, environmentalists, and human rights activists who have dared to speak the truth, stand up to injustice, or simply have an opinion that challenges the authorities who are in charge. These people deserve awards, not bars. Our fight and solidarity are so important to the prisoners. Going public with their cases is the only way to protect the prisoners. And when we say the life of Iran's political prisoners hang in the balance, it's not symbolic, it is reality. I want to give you an example. Baktash Optin, a prominent poet, writer, and freedom of speech advocate, and also board member of the Iranian Writers Association, has been imprisoned since September 2020. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison on charges of propaganda against the state and assembly against national security for peaceful actions, including publishing documents about the Iranian Writers Association's history and statements against censorship. A few weeks ago, he caught COVID for the second time in Evin prison. The authorities did not allow him proper medical treatment. After his health deteriorated, they brought him to hospital, finally, where he has to be put in a coma. When I wrote my statement a few days ago, I wanted to end that we wish he gets well soon. But yesterday we received the shocking message, Baktash Optin is dead. Baktash's death was a planning murder by the Islamic Republic of Iran. The regime has a long history in killing intellectuals, dissidents, and other thinkers. Baktash was murdered because the Islamic Republic of Iran was afraid of his pen. He was a brave, resistant fighter and always stood on his opinions, even in prison. The world lost a poet, a writer, a symbol for resistance. Baktash is the second political prisoner who dies in custody in 2022. This year is 9 days old and 2 murder of political prisoners happened. What is going to happen the other 356 days? What I want to say is the prisoners are brave and they are resistant. They count on us, and it is up to us to be their voice and to fight for their freedom. Change only happens when enough people join in standing up against injustice. For Baktash and for everyone else who is wrongfully imprisoned in the Islamic Republic of Iran, I want to end up my speech with, I think, one of the most famous sentences in Farsi. It meant free Iran's political prisoners, زندانیان سیاسی آزاد باید گردند. Thank you for having me.
I would like, to start my presentation by sharing my screen with you. And okay. Um, this program, my presentation is in collaboration with IEC as well as the Unitarian Church of San Francisco. I would like to briefly mention that human rights organizations started, with after Second World War, with the help of Eleanor Roosevelt, when UN declared the basic human rights in 1948. All Muslim countries, including Iran, accepted and signed that, except Saudi Arabia. And since I came to United States in 1966, I have always volunteered for the Amnesty International because of the human rights, that I believed in. However, since I retired, I have become the coordinator of the group in Wisconsin. And my disclaimer in this presentation is that this is based on my personal encounters with the Islamic Republic of Iran and has not been endorsed by Amnesty International. Since Khomeini came to Iran in 1979, many of us left the United States and went to Iran with the hope that this is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Soon after, the dress code hijab became compulsory, and the militant students seized the US Embassy in Tehran, which was in retaliation to the CIA coup in 1953 when Dr. Mossadegh was removed. In 1980 to 1983, there was cultural revolution. They closed down the university. At the same time, the war between Iraq and Iran started. And this war took 8 years, and for the first time, biological and chemical weapon was used in the war. And of course, West never condemned these warhead. In 1980, when Khomeini was in power, he actually ordered a group of 4 people to organize and implement executions of people who were not conforming to the Islamic Republic of Iran. And in 1988, within a matter of a few months, 5,000 to 6,000 political prisoners and ethnic and religious minority were executed. When the Khomeini was gone, his leader, next leader, Ali Khamenei, defended the 1988 execution and supported Raisi, who was instrumental in the execution, and said whoever were killed in 1988 were terrorists. Sadly, after that, President Raisi has continued executions of innocent people, including minors, political prisoners, Baha'i faiths, Kurds, Baluch, and Arab minorities. And he has served in various capacities before becoming the president. And in 2021, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights inquired the state-ordered mass executions by the Raisi, and Raisi's leadership has imprisoned many political prisoners, including Nasrin Sotoudeh, who has been the defender of the human rights. The policy of Islamic Republic is actually to silence peaceful demonstration, including but not limited to torture and arbitrary detaining of the family member as well. According to an Amnesty International video which was released, many of these prisoners are misbehaved, tortured, and raped, and as though there is no accountability or fear of any repercussions. For over 5 years, Nassim Radcliffe, a UK charity worker, has been separated from his family, from her family, and her 7-year-old daughter. And there has been no transparency in regards to what IEC and the judiciary system in Iran is doing with the people who are under their care. According to AI, shows, I guess I mentioned that lack of investigation constitute, violations of human rights, for which Iran has been signatory in 1948. This is an example of Zainab Jalalian, a Kurdish activist who has been put in prisons for a long time. And despite activities of Amnesty International to secure her freedom, now she is losing her sight and has been there for many years. Last few weeks, in November 2021, there was Auburn Tribune, which was investigating the Iran's atrocity of November 2019. I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from my COVID. And this Tribune showed an account of the peaceful demonstrations by the people, which has actually started with objections to the rise of the gas and fuel. And soon it turned into a bloodshed, not only in large cities, but also in small areas as well. Human rights groups have started some initiative as a minimum form of justice, accountability for this atrocity. Namely, the UN should inquire by a group of international independent group to investigate the Auburn incident of 2019. I have the website, which is a YouTube of the presentation that Amnesty International did at the Tribune, and it shows the data as accountability of every day, as how many people were killed and they're in prison. Suppression of human rights defender continues by Islamic Republic of Iran, and they also call upon civil society to learn the people. The report that was published was December 2021, and it has the name and the situation of all the prisoners in Iran. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you everyone for your all your hard work, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. While Iran's regime has committed numerous human rights violations in its 43 years history, its mass killing of political prisoners in the summer of 1988 stand out for its depravity and cruelty. Over the span of 6 weeks, Iran's regime subjected thousands of political prisoners across the country to minute-long retrials, which failed to meet all international standards of due process, presided over by what the prisoners came to call death commission. Based on no more than a few questions about their political or religious beliefs, prisoners who had already faced, albeit inadequate, trials and sentencing, who had served several years in prison, and who had been subjected to gruesome torture, were sent by the Death Commission to hang. My brother, Bijan Bazargan, was one of them. In 1979, during the revolution, Bijan was a college student in London. Like thousands of others, he returned home to help rebuild his country. Bijan was arrested in July 1982 at age 23. After 2 years of interrogation, torture, and uncertainty, he received a 10-year sentence. His indictment was membership in a leftist party called اتحادیه کمونیست‌های ایران, distributing pamphlets and donating money to his group. After more than 6 years behind bars, he was suddenly executed. The prison authorities told my father that Bijan was killed because he had forsaken his Islamic faith and was an apostate. We now know that Ruhollah Khomeini, the supreme leader of Iran, issued a fatwa, an Islamic judicial decree ordering the killing of thousands of political prisoners who were unwilling to denounce their beliefs. In his order, Khomeini stated that the prisoners were at war with God and must be eliminated. The Revolutionary Guards hanged the prisoners 6 at a time, and meat trucks carried their lifeless bodies to be buried hastily in shallow, unmarked mass graves. The families were never given the location of their loved ones' graves. This massacre was well planned and was kept a secret. The executions were done in July and August, and by early December, all the families were advised of their children's fate. During those months of uncertainty, the families organized and went together in front of the prisons, the Justice Department, the Prime Minister's office, and contacted anyone they knew in the government. They sent a list of the names of their loved ones to the United Nations and Amnesty International. You can see the names of some of the victims in the 16 urgent notices that Amnesty issued from August to December 1988, mobilizing their activists to send letters to Iranian authorities to call for an end to the extrajudicial killings of political prisoners immediately. On December 26, 1988, the families of the victims, mostly mothers, who later were dubbed as Khavaran mothers, named after Khavaran, one of the sites of the mass graves of the political prisoners in Tehran, went in front of the Justice Department. Mothers of Khavaran had written a letter to the Minister of Justice calling the executions crimes against humanity.
Well, I want to thank the Unitarian Universalist Social Forum and, of course, the international campaign, emergency campaign to free Iran's political prisoners for organizing and hosting this event, this very important event. The title is Heroism for Our Time. What do we mean by that? Narges Mohammadi spent over 5 years in prison for human rights activism and heroically refused to stop speaking out, even knowing that she would likely be rearrested, as she was this past November, threatened with 80 lashes and more jail time. Journalist Sepideh Golian was jailed for reporting on struggling sugarcane workers and heroically continued reporting, this time on the brutal treatment of women in the, quote, forgotten hell of Bushehr prison, knowing she could face more charges, torture, even death. Lawyers at the Association for the Protection of Civil Rights in Tehran have heroically defended those targeted by the regime, realizing full well they could be next, imprisoned like human rights attorney Nasrin Sotoudeh. And in August, 7 were cast into Iran's dungeons along with their clients. This is heroism for our time. Heroism demonstrated by women imprisoned for opposing patriarchal enslavement, by ethnic and religious minorities brutalized for fighting discrimination, environmentalists jailed for protecting wildlife, artists and intellectuals persecuted for thinking, creating, speaking, striking workers defying violent suppression, revolutionaries imprisoned for fighting for human emancipation. Many of these heroes have been tortured, held in solitary confinement, denied legal rights and medical aid, like Miriam's mother was and many others. They've been sentenced after sham trials in kangaroo courts, where verdicts come first, evidence later, if at all, yet they've persevered. This is heroism crucial to fighting injustice and for a better world, and heroism that shows the potential for that new world. Heroism not simply to admire, but to emulate and spread. Heroism that must be defended and fought for. The Islamic Republic is trying to imprison Iran's future by imprisoning the committed, the courageous, the far-sighted. We mustn't let this happen. Free Iran's political prisoners now. This is what the IEC, the International Emergency Campaign, is aiming for. Nothing less, and I invite everyone to join and spread this campaign. How can we actually free Iran's political prisoners now in the grip of such a vicious fascistic regime? By exposing the Islamic Republic's crimes and the prisoners' righteousness to growing millions around the world, winning prominent voices to take up this battle and creating a global outcry of condemnation that puts the kind of enormous pressure on the regime that Ariel Dorfman talked about in the letter read by Dolly, by putting the regime on trial, undermining its legitimacy and strengthening the people's struggle against it. We've already seen evidence of the impact of our global effort and those of prisoners, family members, and supporters, human rights organizations, writers groups, legal societies, and others. Regime officials have complained that some prisoners have become world famous. We've heard prisoners' spirits have been buoyed by watching or hearing our IEC forums and other groups' efforts. And after George Floyd's brutal murder, we all saw what a powerful impact the actions of millions worldwide can have on how people think and act. Already thousands around the world have responded to the emergency campaign, but to free the prisoners whose lives truly hang in the balance from this vicious, murderous regime, we have to take this campaign and the struggle to a whole other level. Many, many more, starting now in this new year, and it's so important we're kicking it off with this program. Many, many more need to join this campaign. They need to help raise the many, many thousands of dollars needed to publicize this dire emergency throughout society and the world. This needs to be made an issue that can't be ignored, that many millions more know about and feel compelled to act on. For that to happen, and for any hope of a better world, people here in the US, the belly of the imperialist beast, need to stop thinking about themselves and America first and start thinking about humanity and the planet first, including facing the horrors and rejecting the vilification America's visited on the Iranian people. This is especially crucial now when the drums of war are sounding once again, with the US and Israel debating whether to attack if talks with Iran fail. In other words, how to maintain their nuclear monopoly and stranglehold on the Middle East and the world. Laden described the kinds of reactionary groups the Islamic Republic supported, but for everyone the IRI supporting, the US is supporting Israel. They're supporting the butchers of Saudi Arabia that have pushed 14 million people in Yemen to the brink of starvation. They're backing up tortures and murders in Egypt, and we can go all the way around the world. This is why the emergency campaign proceeds from the interests of humanity, not the agendas of any of the world's reactionary powers. And this is why the emergency appeal declares that we in the US have a special responsibility to unite very broadly against the vile repression by the Islamic Republic and to actively oppose any war moves by the US government that would bring even more unbearable suffering to the people of Iran. Here's another thing. We'll never free the prisoners, and we're never going to end injustice by picking between oppressors or siding with one or the other. America is not a force for good in the world. I was in Iraq in 1991 and visited hospitals where infants, thin as a bird, were starving to death because the US had bombed Iraq's water system and power system. The US claimed to be a liberator of the Iraqi people, then took the lives of over 500 children with its sanctions. And the ambassador to the UN from the US admitted it on television, Madeleine Albright. This is why our emergency appeal demands the lifting of US sanctions and no aggression, no war moves. Iran's Islamic Republic is not an alternative, an anti-imperialist alternative to global capitalism and the American empire. These governments, the US and Iran, are not clashing over liberation. They're clashing over reactionary and influence and power in the region and the globe. My understanding, and I studied the Middle East for quite some time. I was in Iran in 1979. I saw the brutality of the Islamic Republic firsthand and up close and personal. But my understanding of this global clash between Islamic fundamentalism and Western imperialism has been deepened and clarified by crucial analysis from the revolutionary leader and author of The New Communism, Bob Avakian. He analyzes that this conflict is between historically outmoded strata among colonized and oppressed humanity up against historically outmoded ruling strata of the imperialist system. That these two reactionary poles reinforce each other, even while opposing each other. That if you side with either of these outmodeds and support any of their actions, no matter how they justify them, you end up strengthening both. And that of these two reactionary outmoded forces, it's the United States which has done the greater damage and poses the greater threat to humanity. And just think about the nuclear threat and the threat of climate change, and what power in the world has done more to endanger all of humanity than the United States. Look across the Middle East, from Libya to Iraq and Iran to Afghanistan. You'll see devastating evidence of this terrible dynamic and the urgent need to break out of it and bring forward another way. The international emergency campaign to free Iran's political prisoners is about justice. It's about our shared humanity. We're about breaking barriers between people and crossing borders and boundaries, not erecting them. Fighting for Iran's political prisoners is part of building the spirit of internationalism, and it's part of fighting for another way the world can be. A world where women are neither sex objects nor incubators, where the natural world is treasured, not plundered, where relations between different parts of our planet are no longer determined by domination and war. A world not ruled by imperialists or Islamic fundamentalists, a world without oppression or exploitation. So we're fighting to help free the caged birds, Iran's political prisoners, so they can soar and sing, so that we can all soar and sing together in common struggle for a future worthy of human beings. Join us. Free Iran's political prisoners now. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all who joined us today, and I hope to see you in the struggle. I want to especially thank Iran's political prisoners, the resistors and revolutionaries, in setting the example of heroism for our time, for everyone in the world to follow. If ever the world needed it, it is now. I want to thank the signatories of the emergency appeal and urge everyone listening to sign it without delay, and urge others you know to do the same. This is the first thing you can do to join the struggle. The second, third, and fourth thing you can do is to donate, 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 so we can publish the emergency appeal further in the US and globally. Another thing you can do is to join us, is to visit and broadly share our website, freeiranspoliticalprisonersnow.org, and also our Twitter feed at Iran Prison Emerge. Visit and share the Instagram of Burn the Cage, Instagram.com, Burn the Cage. Most of all, volunteer with us to do outreach, fundraising, film showings, research, and especially translations between English and Farsi. Again, thank you so very much to the UUSF for hosting this event, especially to Bruce, Melvin, and Lori, to the panel of speakers, and to those who sent your solidarity statements. Thank you for all the information and the camaraderie you shared. And thank you to all our Tuesday night baby Zoomers who learned to work together in order to make this program a success, especially the tech team. To our dearest friends in Colombia, Europe, Canada, and all over the world, adelante.